The morning of July 27, 1944, began quietly for Hauptmann Friedrich Weber's artillery battery, positioned 3 kilometers south of St. Lo. Weber commanded 4 105mm LEFH-18 howitzers from the 352nd Infantry Division's artillery regiment. His crews had served together since Poland in 1939, fought through France, survived 3 years on the Eastern Front, and now found themselves in Normandy, facing the Americans. Weber had studied American doctrine before the invasion. He read captured field manuals, reviewed intelligence reports, listened to officers who had fought in North Africa and Sicily. The consensus among German artillery officers was consistent. American artillery was adequate but unimaginative. The Americans relied on overwhelming material superiority rather than tactical sophistication. They fired vast quantities of ammunition at area targets, saturating landscapes with steel in the hope that something would be hit. Wasteful, inefficient, typical of an army built on industrial excess rather than professional competence. The German way was superior. Precision fire, careful target selection, economical use of ammunition. German artillery doctrine emphasized accuracy over volume, quality over quantity. A well-trained German battery could achieve hits with 3 or 4 ranging rounds. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you're watching from today. Then fire for effect with devastating precision. American batteries, according to the intelligence assessments Weber had read, required dozens of rounds to achieve the same result, and often failed to achieve it at all. Weber's own experience seemed to confirm these assessments. Since arriving in Normandy in mid-June, his battery had observed American artillery fire repeatedly. The Americans did indeed fire enormous quantities of ammunition. Thousands of rounds per day landed in the German sector, but most of that fire seemed random, uncoordinated, ineffective. Shells landed scattered across fields and roads, hitting nothing of military value. The American method appeared to be spraying ammunition across the landscape and hoping for results. Weber's battery, in contrast, fired perhaps 20 rounds per day, carefully selecting targets identified by forward observers, computing firing data with mathematical precision, adjusting fire through trained observation, and achieving direct hits on enemy positions, vehicles, and concentrations. Efficient, professional. The German way. The contempt extended beyond Weber's battery. Throughout the German army in Normandy, artillery officers shared similar assessments. The Americans had more guns, more ammunition, more everything. But they did not know how to use what they had. They fired blindly, wasted resources, achieved results only through sheer volume of fire rather than skill. Let them expend millions of shells. A properly trained German battery could accomplish more with 100 rounds than the Americans achieved with 1,000. This attitude was not merely professional pride. It was based on tactical doctrine, developed over decades and validated in combat across Europe. German artillery officers trained for years in fire control procedures. They studied ballistics, meteorology, trigonometry. They learned to compute firing data manually using logarithmic tables and slide rules, adjusting for every variable, from barrel wear to powder temperature. The process was complex and time-consuming, but it produced accurate fire. American artillery officers, according to German intelligence assessments, used simplified procedures that sacrificed precision for speed. They relied on shortcuts, approximations, and mass fire to compensate for lack of accuracy. The American system worked only because Americans had unlimited ammunition. In any engagement between German and American artillery of equal strength, German superiority in training and doctrine would be decisive. At 0730 hours on July 27th, Weber received orders to provide fire support for an infantry counterattack. The 352nd Division was attempting to restore a defensive line broken by American advances the previous day. Weber's battery would suppress American positions on Hill 122, while German infantry maneuvered to retake the position. Weber's crews moved efficiently through familiar procedures. Forward observers provided target coordinates. Weber's fire direction team plotted the target location on their mapboard, measured range and azimuth, consulted firing tables, calculated corrections for wind and temperature, and computed individual firing data for each howitzer. The process required 12 minutes. Standard German procedure for a fire mission of this type called for 10 to 15 minutes. Weber's battery was performing within doctrine. At 0742, Weber gave the order to fire. The 4 howitzers fired in sequence, each gun crew executing the precise drill they had practiced thousands of times. Load, aim, fire. The shells arced toward Hill 122, 3,000 meters distant. Weber's forward observer reported shell impacts short of target by 100 meters. Weber's fire direction team recalculated, adjusted elevation, transmitted corrections to the gun crews. The second salvo fired at 0745. The observer reported rounds on target. Weber ordered fire for effect. The battery fired 6 rounds per gun over the next 4 minutes, 24 shells total, all landing in a 200-meter radius around the American positions on Hill 122. Efficient use of ammunition, accurate fire, professional execution. The German infantry began their advance. Then the American artillery responded. The sound came from multiple directions simultaneously, high-pitched whistles that built to a shrieking crescendo. Weber recognized the sound of incoming artillery. American 105mm shells, judging by the pitch. He shouted for his crews to take cover. The men began moving toward the slit trenches dug near each gun position. The shells arrived before anyone reached cover. The first salvo landed precisely on Weber's battery position, not scattered across 100 meters, not walking toward the target through ranging shots. Every shell from every American battery firing at Weber's position landed within a 3-second window directly on his guns. 12 shells arrived simultaneously, then 12 more, then 12 more. The salvos continued for 20 seconds. 7 salvos, total. 84 shells, all landing in the exact location where Weber's battery had been firing moments before. Time elapsed from Weber's last rounds, fired to the first American shells landing, was less than 4 minutes. Weber survived because he was standing behind his command post dugout when the fire arrived. The dugout, reinforced with logs and sandbags, shielded him from the blast. 2 of his gun crews were caught in the open, 8 men dead, 5 wounded. 3 of his 4 howitzers destroyed. The 4th damaged, trails bent, sight mechanisms shattered. The battery's ammunition stocks detonated in secondary explosions that continued for 5 minutes after the American fire ceased. Weber's battery had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Total time from his last rounds fired to his battery's destruction was less than 9 minutes. Weber was evacuated to a field hospital with concussion and shrapnel wounds to his left arm and shoulder. During his recovery, he spoke with other German artillery officers who had experienced similar engagements. Every conversation followed the same pattern: shock, disbelief, confusion about what had happened and how the Americans had done it. The pattern Weber experienced was not unique. It was happening repeatedly across Normandy. German artillery batteries would fire a mission, then receive devastating counterfire within minutes, not scattered suppressive fire, not harassing fire. Precise, massed fire that destroyed guns and killed crews before they could displace. The speed was impossible, according to German doctrine. Locating an enemy battery required sound-ranging equipment or aerial observation, both of which took time. Computing firing data required complex calculations that took 10 to 15 minutes minimum. Coordinating fire from multiple batteries required communication between units, agreement on timing, calculation of individual firing solutions for each battery based on their positions. The entire process, from target identification to shells on target, should require 30 to 40 minutes. The Americans were doing it in under 5 minutes, often in 3 minutes, sometimes in less than 2 minutes from the moment a German gun fired to the moment American shells landed on that position. German intelligence officers attempted to understand how this was possible. Initial assessments suggested the Americans must have pre-registered targets calculating firing data in advance for likely enemy artillery positions, then firing when those positions were identified. But that explanation failed when German batteries were hit immediately after firing from new positions that Americans could not have known about hours earlier. Other theories proposed that Americans were using some form of new technology, perhaps improved sound-ranging equipment or radar systems that could locate guns instantly. These theories were partially correct. Americans did have excellent sound-ranging equipment and were beginning to employ counter-battery radar. But technology alone did not explain the speed or the precision of American counterfire. The truth was more fundamental. The Americans had developed an entirely different system for controlling artillery fire, a system that German officers barely understood even when they captured documents describing it. The system was called the Fire Direction Center, and it represented a philosophical transformation in how artillery operated. German artillery, like most armies, operated at the battery level. Each battery was a self-contained unit. The battery commander received fire missions, calculated firing data, controlled his guns, observed results, and adjusted fire. If multiple batteries needed to fire on the same target, coordination happened through higher headquarters, sending orders to each battery commander, who then independently calculated his firing solution and fired when ready. This decentralized system had advantages. Battery commanders had direct control of their weapons. They could respond to local tactical situations. They understood their sector and could make decisions based on ground-level observation. The system had worked effectively for decades, but the system had limitations. Coordination was slow. Massing fire from multiple batteries required time for communication, calculation, and execution. Fire missions progressed sequentially, one step after another. Target identified, coordinates transmitted, firing data calculated, orders issued to guns, fire mission executed, observe results, adjust fire. The process was methodical, professional, and slow. The American system was different at a fundamental level. Americans did not control artillery at the battery level. They controlled it at battalion level or higher through centralized fire direction centers staffed by specialists whose only job was computing firing data and coordinating fire missions. When an American forward observer identified a target and called for fire, the request went not to a battery commander, but to a fire direction center. The center received the target coordinates, evaluated which batteries were in range, calculated firing data for all batteries simultaneously, and transmitted complete firing instructions to every gun. The batteries did not calculate anything. They received firing commands and executed them. This centralization eliminated redundant calculation. Instead of 4 battery commanders independently computing firing solutions for the same target, one fire direction center computed all solutions simultaneously. Instead of coordination happening through sequential communication between units, coordination happened instantly within the fire direction center. The system was faster by an order of magnitude, but speed alone was not the revolution. The revolution was in how Americans computed firing data. German artillery officers used firing tables, massive books containing calculated data for thousands of combinations of range, charge, elevation, and conditions. Finding the correct data in these tables required searching through pages of numbers, then interpolating between listed values to account for specific conditions. The process required mathematical skill and took time. American artillery officers at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, had developed something called the graphical firing table in 1940. It was essentially a specialized transparent overlay that could be placed on a map. The fire direction officer aligned the overlay with the gun position and target position, then read firing data directly from the overlay without calculation. Elevation, deflection, charge, time of flight, all visible instantly. The graphical firing table reduced firing data computation from 10 minutes to 30 seconds. An American fire direction center could receive a target, compute firing data for multiple batteries, and have shells on the way before a German battery commander could finish looking up the correct page in his firing tables. But even the graphical firing table was not the most devastating innovation. The innovation that destroyed Friedrich Weber's battery and hundreds of others like it was called time on target. Time on target was conceptually simple, but technically complex. Instead of having multiple batteries fire when ready, producing sequential impacts over several minutes, coordinate batteries, so all shells arrived on target simultaneously within a few seconds. The technique required computing not just where to aim, but when to fire. Batteries closer to the target had to fire later than batteries farther away. Each battery's firing time was calculated so that shells with different flight times all arrived together. When executed properly, dozens of guns from multiple batteries spread across kilometers would fire at different moments, but every shell would impact the target within a 3-second window. The effect was devastating. Traditional artillery bombardments gave soldiers time to react. The first shells landed, soldiers dove for cover. Subsequent shells arrived over the next minutes. Casualties occurred primarily in the first few seconds before soldiers could take cover. After that, men in foxholes or behind cover survived even intense bombardment. Time on target eliminated that reaction time. Every shell arrived simultaneously. There was no warning. One moment, silence. The next moment, the entire bombardment landed at once. Every soldier exposed at that instant became a casualty. No one had time to react, to dive, to take cover. The entire lethal effect of the bombardment was compressed into 3 seconds. German soldiers who survived time-on-target missions reported psychological effects that transcended ordinary artillery fire. They described feeling as if the earth exploded beneath them without warning. Survivors reported being physically lifted by blast waves, thrown through the air, buried by debris, deafened by concussion. Those who were not hit described seeing entire squads disappear in an instant, men standing one moment and gone the next, positions occupied 1 second and obliterated 3 seconds later. The psychological impact extended beyond individual engagements. German soldiers learned that concentration meant death. If a squad gathered to receive orders, if a platoon assembled for an attack, if artillery crews served their guns, American observers would see the concentration and time-on-target fire would arrive within minutes. Survival required dispersion. Never gather, never concentrate, never present a target. This imperative paralyzed German tactical operations. Infantry could not mass for attacks. Artillery could not fire sustained missions. Supply convoys could not form columns. Every activity that required soldiers to be in the same place simultaneously became suicidally dangerous. German forces were forced into a tactical straitjacket, able to defend only from dispersed positions, unable to concentrate force for any purpose, without triggering devastating American artillery response. The technical execution of time-on-target missions required capabilities that only the American artillery system possessed. First, accurate target location. American forward observers were extensively trained in map reading and target location. They carried plotting boards, compasses, and binoculars calibrated for range estimation. An experienced observer could estimate target coordinates within 50 meters at ranges up to 2,000 meters. More critically, Americans had aerial observers flying in Piper L-4 Cub aircraft. These small observation planes, military versions of civilian sport aircraft, flew constantly over the battlefield at altitudes of 1,000 to 1,500 feet. From that altitude, an observer could see terrain for miles, targets invisible to ground observers, positions hidden behind hills, units concealed in tree lines, artillery batteries in defilade. All were visible from the air. The L-4 aircraft had direct radio communication with fire direction centers. An aerial observer could identify a target, estimate coordinates, and call for fire without any intermediate step. The Fire Direction Center received target information directly from the observer, who could see the target, eliminating communication delays and reducing errors. German soldiers learned to recognize the distinctive sound of the L-4's small engine. The aircraft flew low and slow, engine sound clearly audible from the ground. When German troops heard that sound, They knew they had approximately 3 minutes before artillery fire would arrive. 3 minutes to take cover, disperse, hide anything that might attract attention. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German tactical manuals from late 1944 included specific instructions for reacting to L-4 aircraft. Cease movement immediately, disperse to maximum extent, take cover and remain motionless, wait for the aircraft to leave the area before resuming operations. The presence of L-4 aircraft transformed the battlefield. German forces could never feel safe, even in rear areas. The small planes flew constantly, observing everything, calling fire on any worthwhile target. Supply convoys, artillery batteries, troop concentrations, command posts, all were vulnerable to observation and immediate fire. Second capability required for time on target was rapid computation. American fire direction centers used graphical firing tables that provided instant firing data, but time on target required additional calculations beyond basic range and deflection. Each battery had to fire at a specific time so shells arrived together. The fire direction center had to compute time of flight for each battery's shells, then work backwards to determine firing time. American fire direction officers were trained in these calculations. They could compute time on target firing schedules in under 2 minutes for missions involving up to 12 batteries. The calculations were not particularly complex mathematically, but they required understanding projectile ballistics and systematic organization of data for multiple batteries firing simultaneously. German artillery officers were capable of similar calculations theoretically, but German doctrine did not emphasize time-on-target techniques. German artillery training focused on individual battery operations rather than massed fires. German fire direction procedures were decentralized, making the coordination required for time on target difficult to achieve on short notice. Third capability was communication. Time on target missions required precise timing. If one battery fired early or late, shells would arrive scattered rather than simultaneous. Every battery had to receive firing orders with exact timing instructions and had to execute those orders precisely. American artillery battalions had extensive radio networks. Each battery had multiple radios. Fire direction centers had direct communication with every subordinate unit. Radio procedure was standardized. Timing signals were synchronized using artillery time signals transmitted by radio at regular intervals. The entire system was designed for coordination. German radio communications were less extensive. German artillery units used radios, but also relied on telephone lines for primary communication. Telephone lines were vulnerable to artillery fire, often cut during preparatory bombardments. Radio discipline was sometimes poor, frequencies overcrowded, procedures inconsistent. The German communication system worked adequately for traditional battery-level operations, but was not optimized for the kind of precision coordination that time on target required. Fourth capability was ammunition supply. Time on target missions consumed enormous quantities of ammunition. A single time on target mission might involve 10 batteries, firing 6 rounds each, 60 shells on one target, multiple missions per day, quickly depleted ammunition stocks. American artillery fired time-on-target missions routinely because American logistics could sustain that rate of fire. Each American division in Normandy was supplied with approximately 1,500 tons of ammunition per day during active operations. Artillery ammunition accounted for the largest portion of that tonnage. Supply convoys ran constantly between ammunition dumps and gun positions. Batteries firing intensive missions could request resupply and have trucks arrive within hours. The ammunition was always available because American industrial production and logistics made it available. German ammunition supply was constrained. Allied air interdiction had devastated German logistics networks. Trains were attacked constantly. Road convoys moved only at night, and even then faced air attack from night fighters. Ammunition production in Germany was declining as factories were damaged by strategic bombing and raw materials became scarce. German artillery batteries in Normandy operated under strict ammunition rationing. Battalions might receive only 200 rounds per day for all batteries combined. Firing even one time-on-target mission would consume a significant fraction of daily allocation. The combination of these four capabilities, accurate target location through ground and aerial observation, rapid fire direction computation through graphical firing tables and trained specialists, reliable communication through extensive radio networks, and abundant ammunition through industrial production and efficient logistics, gave American artillery a qualitative superiority that transcended mere numbers. German artillery officers who survived encounters with the American system consistently reported in interrogation that American artillery was not simply more numerous, but fundamentally different. The German army in Normandy faced an artillery system that could see everything, calculate instantly, coordinate perfectly, and fire unlimited ammunition. There was no defense. German doctrine for evading counterfire assumed at least 10 minutes between firing and receiving return fire. American counterfire arrived in under 5 minutes, often in 3 minutes, sometimes in less than 2 minutes. German displacement procedures became irrelevant. By the time gun crews could unhitch trails and connect prime movers, American shells were landing. German camouflage discipline became futile. Artillery positions, hidden from ground observation, were visible from the air. German ammunition conservation became academic. No matter how carefully German batteries managed their ammunition, American batteries fired 10 times as many shells and never seemed to run short. The Battle of Mortain in early August 1944 provided the most dramatic demonstration of time-on-target effectiveness against massed German forces. German commanders had assembled 4 panzer divisions for a desperate counterattack aimed at cutting off American forces that had broken out of Normandy. The attack was Germany's last attempt to restore the front and prevent encirclement of Army Group B. The attack began before dawn on August 7th, with German armor and infantry advancing rapidly. Initial progress was good. American forces were surprised. German units penetrated several kilometers in some sectors, but as dawn broke and visibility improved, American artillery observers in L4 Cubs took to the air and the systematic destruction began. American fire direction centers had been alerted to expect German counterattacks. Artillery battalions were positioned to provide overlapping coverage across the entire threatened sector. Corps artillery was on standby. As soon as aerial observers reported German columns, fire direction centers began coordinating time-on-target missions. The 30th Infantry Division's supporting artillery, including the 230th Field Artillery Battalion, fired continuously throughout August 7th. Individual batteries fired so intensively that gun barrels overheated and had to be cooled with water before firing could continue. The time-on-target missions were devastating. German tank columns attempting to advance found themselves under massed fire that arrived with no warning. Tanks buttoned up, limiting visibility. Infantry took cover, halting the advance. Every time German commanders attempted to reorganize for another push, aerial observers spotted the concentration and more time-on-target missions landed. By mid-morning, on August 7th, the German attack had stalled. By afternoon, German commanders recognized the attack had failed. The American artillery fire combined with fighter-bomber attacks directed by the same aerial observers who were calling artillery fire had made sustained offensive operations impossible. German forces began attempting to withdraw, but found themselves under continuous fire during the withdrawal as well. Lieutenant Ralph Curley, commanding Easy Company's 2nd Battalion, 120th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Division, personally directed artillery fire on his own position when German forces assaulted Hill 314 near Mortain. The German 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division attacked Curley's isolated position just after 8 in the evening on August 7th. Curley, surrounded and facing overwhelming force, called for danger close fire missions on his own coordinates. The Fire Direction Center coordinated fire from multiple battalions. The time-on-target mission that followed was one of the most remarkable of the Normandy campaign. 84 howitzers from 7 different battalions, fired simultaneously. Every shell landed within a 200-meter radius of Curley's position within a 5-second window. American soldiers, huddled in foxholes, survived the friendly fire through a combination of overhead cover and statistical luck. German attackers, caught in the open, were annihilated. The attack broke. Survivors retreated. Curley's position held. The willingness of an American company commander to call massed artillery fire on his own position reflected 2 things. First, the desperate tactical situation. Second, and more significantly, absolute confidence in the precision and coordination of American artillery. Curley knew the Fire Direction Center would deliver fire exactly where he requested. He knew every battery would fire exactly when ordered. He knew the time-on-target mission would arrive as a single, overwhelming salvo rather than scattered impacts over time. That confidence was based on a system that worked reliably under the most extreme conditions. German commanders had no equivalent confidence in their artillery. German fire direction procedures did not allow for the kind of precision that time-on-target missions demanded. German communication networks could not coordinate simultaneous fires from 7 battalions on 3 minutes' notice. German ammunition supply could not sustain the rate of fire that American batteries maintained throughout the day. The Battle for St. Lo in July 1944 showed similar patterns. The 2nd Infantry Division, tasked with capturing Hill 192, a key terrain feature dominating approaches to the city, planned a deliberate attack supported by massive artillery preparation. Division artillery alone included 48 guns. Corps artillery added dozens more. The Fire Direction Center coordinated fire from over 100 guns belonging to multiple divisions and corps. On the night of July 10th to July 11th, American artillery fired 20 time-on-target missions against German defensive positions on Hill 192. Each mission brought mass fire from all available batteries onto carefully selected targets. The missions were spaced approximately 1 hour apart throughout the night, preventing German defenders from resting or reorganizing. Sleep became impossible. Constant stress accumulated. Command and control degraded as telephone lines were cut, and runners could not move between positions under continuous fire. On July 11th, the main attack began with sustained time-on-target missions fired in sequence against defensive strongpoints. The 2nd Infantry Division artillery alone fired 20,000 rounds that day. The average American howitzer in that engagement fired more than 400 rounds, vastly exceeding what German ammunition supply could sustain. Hill 192 was captured by early afternoon after German resistance collapsed under the bombardment. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 to January 1945 represented the ultimate test of American artillery doctrine against a major German offensive. When German forces achieved tactical surprise on December 16th and penetrated deep into American lines, artillery was the decisive arm that stopped the offensive. On the northern shoulder of the German penetration near Elsenborn Ridge, American artillery played the critical role in stopping the 6th Panzer Army. The Fire Direction Centers coordinated fire from 348 guns belonging to multiple divisions and corps. This concentration of firepower, controlled through coordinated fire direction centers capable of executing time-on-target missions against any German concentration, created an impenetrable barrier of steel. German infantry and armor attacking toward Elsenborn Ridge encountered time-on-target fire that landed without warning whenever forces concentrated for an attack. German after-action reports, compiled during and after the battle, consistently identified American artillery as the decisive factor that prevented breakthrough. One German regimental commander reported that every attempt to mass forces for assault triggered American artillery fire so accurate and intense that attacks could not be sustained. In the southern sector at Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division, surrounded inside the town, was supported by artillery that remained inside the pocket and by artillery firing from outside the encirclement. Forward observers with the paratroopers maintained constant radio contact with fire direction centers. Whenever German forces attempted to attack Bastogne, time-on-target missions broke up the attacks before they reached American lines. The psychological effect of time-on-target missions on German morale was profound and cumulative. Soldiers who experienced even one time-on-target mission recognized they had faced something qualitatively different from ordinary artillery fire. The absolute precision of the timing, the overwhelming simultaneity of the impact, the complete absence of warning, created psychological trauma that transcended physical damage. German soldiers, interviewed after capture, consistently described American artillery using language that reflected helplessness and fear. They spoke of fire that arrived like lightning, that gave no chance to react, that destroyed everything in an instant. German training and doctrine emphasized that soldiers could survive artillery fire through proper fieldcraft, digging in, using terrain, dispersing forces. Time-on-target missions made those techniques feel futile. The mockery that German artillery officers had expressed toward American methods in early 1944 disappeared entirely by late 1944. German intelligence assessments from autumn 1944 acknowledged American artillery superiority and recommended extreme caution in conducting operations that might draw counterfire. German tactical manuals advised units to avoid concentrating forces, to fire artillery only when absolutely necessary, and then only brief missions followed by immediate displacement, to take cover whenever American observation aircraft appeared overhead. These recommendations represented complete defensive posture. German artillery, which had been a feared offensive weapon, was reduced to defensive suppression missions, fired hastily to cover retreats or desperate counterattacks. German gunners, who had once taken professional pride in their accuracy and efficiency, learned that survival required hiding, minimizing activity, and avoiding engagement whenever possible. Friedrich Weber recovered from his wounds and returned to duty in September 1944. He was assigned to a replacement battery in the West Wall fortifications, facing the American First Army. The battery to which he was assigned had 4 guns. Within 2 weeks, 2 guns were destroyed by American counterfire. Within a month, the battery was withdrawn from the line and disbanded, survivors distributed to other units as individual replacements. Weber finished the war as a forward observer for a hastily organized Volkssturm unit in the Ruhr pocket. In interviews after the war, Weber stated that American artillery superiority was the single most important factor in German defeat in the West. He noted that German soldiers could fight American infantry and armor on relatively equal terms despite numerical inferiority, but German forces had no answer to American artillery. The combination of aerial observation, rapid fire direction, time-on-target missions, and unlimited ammunition made sustained defensive operations impossible and offensive operations suicidal. The technical innovations that created American artillery superiority were not secret. After the war, documents describing fire direction center procedures and time-on-target techniques were published openly. Every military in the world studied American artillery doctrine. The Soviet Union adopted centralized fire direction procedures in the late 1940s. NATO standardized on American artillery methods. Modern artillery of every major military uses descendants of the fire direction center concept developed at Fort Sill in the 1930s. But during World War II, American artillery doctrine represented a decisive advantage that German forces could not counter. The advantage stemmed not from a single invention, but from systematic integration of observation, communication, computation, coordination, and logistics into a unified system optimized for rapid, precise, overwhelming fire support. The system worked because every element reinforced every other element. Excellent. Observation was useless without rapid computation. Rapid computation was useless without reliable communication. Communication was useless without abundant ammunition and mobility to sustain operations. The men who developed the system, artillery officers at Fort Sill who spent years refining doctrine in peacetime, received little recognition. The men who operated the system, fire direction officers and specialists who calculated firing data and coordinated missions under combat stress, appear rarely in histories. The forward observers who flew L-4 Cubs over enemy territory, calling fire missions are footnotes in campaign narratives. The gun crews who served howitzers through thousands of fire missions are anonymous, yet their collective effort created the most effective artillery system in military history. To that point, German artillery officers who had mocked American methods as wasteful and unsophisticated learned, through bitter experience, that the American system represented a revolution in how artillery functioned. The revolution was not visible in the appearance of the weapons. American guns were not dramatically better than German guns. The 105mm M2A1 howitzer was comparable to the German LEF-H-18 in range and destructive power. The revolution was in organization, doctrine, training, and systematic application of technology to solve coordination problems. The mockery turned to respect, then to fear, then to helpless recognition that German artillery doctrine had been rendered obsolete by an enemy who had reconceptualized how artillery should operate at a fundamental level. By the end of the war in Europe, German artillery had been reduced to marginal effectiveness. Surviving German gun crews fired only when absolutely necessary, displaced immediately after every mission, operated under severe ammunition constraints, and accepted that American counterfire would arrive with devastating speed and accuracy. The professional pride that German artillery officers had felt in 1939 had been replaced by grim awareness that they were outmatched by a system they could not defeat and could barely understand. The final irony was that the superiority was not based on German weakness, but on American innovation. German artillery training was excellent. German guns were effective. German gunnery technique was sophisticated. But the Germans had developed their artillery doctrine to fight a different kind of war, one where battles were won through maneuver and tactical sophistication rather than through systematic application of firepower. The American approach assumed that wars were won through industrial production, efficient logistics, and systematic organization of overwhelming force. Both approaches were rational, given the strategic situations of their respective nations. Germany lacked the industrial capacity to match American production. German doctrine emphasized quality over quantity because Germany had no choice. America possessed vast industrial capacity and approached warfare as a problem of organizing and applying that capacity efficiently. American artillery doctrine reflected American strategic advantages, producing a system optimized to exploit industrial superiority through systematic fire control procedures. The result was that when German and American artillery systems met in direct competition, the American system dominated completely. Time-on-target missions became the visible symbol of that dominance. The moment when hundreds of shells arrived simultaneously out of nowhere, demonstrating that American artillery could see everything, calculate instantly, coordinate perfectly, and deliver overwhelming firepower against any target anywhere within range, within minutes. German soldiers who survived those missions carried psychological scars that transcended physical wounds. They had experienced a form of warfare that their training had not prepared them for, that their doctrine could not counter, that made their professional skills irrelevant. The experience taught them that modern industrial warfare had rules they had not understood, rules that favored nations with vast production capacity and systematic approaches to organizing firepower. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.